to Odylia Therapeutics Bridge Solutions video series. My name is Catherine Postamont, and today I want to present you with part 2 of an interview I did on scientific advisory boards for patient advocacy groups. If you haven't already checked out part 1, feel free to pause the video here and check out part 1 and then follow up with part 2. For these interviews, I interviewed Odylia's CSO and CEO, Ashley Winslow, and Odylia's Manager of Operations and Program Management, Jenny Klein. I hope you enjoyed part 2. Hi, welcome back. We stopped our earlier discussion of scientific advisory boards for patient advocacy groups. Today we're talking with Odylia CEO and CSO Ashley Winslow and Odylia Manager of Operations and Program Management Jenny Klein. And they both come with a little bit of different backgrounds on their experience with patient advocacy boards or patient advocacy scientific advisory boards. If you want to learn more about that, please check our part 1 of this video. But we'll start off, we last left it talking about why it can be difficult to recruit a great scientific advisory board. So kind of building off of that, my next question is, when is it best to use experienced advisors, and when does it make sense to bring in more junior advisors to a scientific advisory board?
Sure, I can start. So I think it's a great idea to have junior advisors or junior scientific advisory board members when you want fresh ideas that you need to bring to your focus area. Experts are always important to have on your scientific advisory board, especially experts in your rare disease area. But we always want to be recruiting new researchers into our rare disease areas because we always need more research in this space. So Ashley, do you have any thoughts?
I think having a mix is really good for reasons you said. Having seasoned, experienced individuals who know the space or know drug development or know the rare disease or the clinical manifestations is really important because having some of that historical, but also just kind of the wisdom of working in that space for so long, the obstacles. But sometimes having the more junior individuals allows fresh thinking, like you said, Jenny. I think it's also really important to have more junior individuals because you want to get people excited about the disease that have the potential to impact that disease for as many years as possible. So finding those individuals that are earlier in the career and getting them excited about the disease, the gene, the protein, the function, the biology, and really getting to know the patients from an early stage in their career can be really an inspiring experience for researchers and not something researchers get access to a lot. And I do think it can result in an impactful and lasting relationship as that individual goes through their career. Sometimes that career is still in academic research. Sometimes it's going into industry. And so you're basically seeding the space for that next generation of drug developers in rare disease. So that can be an exciting journey to watch as well.
Have you guys found too that, experienced versus junior members have more or less time to commit to a scientific advisory board, or would you say it's similar, or it just depends on the person?
Mixed bag. Sometimes people are earlier in career, maybe don't have all of the same kind of extracurricular committees and things that they sit on, but they're sometimes they're still at the bench as well as managing their lab, or maybe they spend a lot more hours in the lab and managing folks. I don't know. I think it's somewhat individual in my experience. Jenny, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's definitely individual based. What you get with an expert advisor is someone who probably has more commitments around the disease area and the space because they are often sitting on multiple scientific advisory boards. So that's the caveat I would say with the experts in your field.
That makes sense. And how, in your guys' experience on scientific advisory boards or working with scientific advisory boards, how have you dealt with conflict of interest? For example, if you have a scientific advisory board and your group is also funding research and one of the members of your scientific advisory board is being funded by your group, how do you manage that potential conflict of interest in, maybe determining who receives grants or how that works?
So I can take a shot at this. I would definitely say if you are funding a scientist on your scientific advisory board, or they are up for funding, then that individual probably can't participate in certain activities. Like they won't be able to vote on their own research proposal, for example. It's also just very important to highlight those conflicts of interest if you have any. Usually if they're highlighted, it's not a problem and they can step away from activities that they can't participate in. But you just need to make everyone aware that there is that conflict of interest.
Yeah, I mean, it might be worth recommending to each organization. I think this is something we've done in our practice with patient groups, is to have the conflict of interest statement updated for all of your SAB members yearly, just to make sure that there's nothing that needs to be reviewed or considered in more detail.
Yeah, that's true, because funding for researchers can change year to year too. So knowing what new conflicts might have come up, or conflicts that were there that aren't there anymore, is probably a good idea. And have you guys had experience dealing within the scientific advisory board if there's conflict within? So if the scientific advisory board disagrees maybe strongly about where to fund money, or how the organization should move forward, how have you dealt with that, or how have you seen that dealt with?
So in my experience, the scientific advisory board is typically separate from the governing board or the executive board, which is the board that makes decisions for the organization as a whole. So if there is conflict within the scientific advisory board, that will usually be brought to like the governing board of directors, and it can be worked out there. The other option is to bring in a third party that is neutral and unbiased to help resolve that conflict. But Ashley, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think that the board structure can be really important, and how those two boards that you mentioned interact. So oftentimes you set up the governing board as that decision maker and the kind of the final decision. And that scientific advisory board is often more of a proposer. So there's a vote on what they propose, but it's not binding. And so I think that takes some of that pressure off. Healthy discussion, healthy debate is something you do want to see in a scientific advisory board. You don't want everybody to have the same mindset, or you're not going to get that innovative thinking. But it is important to be able, in how you structure how the boards interact and how they interact with one another, and thinking through, is it a unanimous vote across the SAB that makes that recommendation, or is it a majority vote? So I think some of that can help, putting that forethought in up front can help deal with and address those issues. And I think Odylia has come in as a unbiased third party in instances where there's conflict or you're at odds with the researcher in the past. And it's something that I think can be avoided if there's appropriate forethought in that structure. But hindsight's 2020. It's easier said than done.
And I guess sort of it kind of goes back a little bit to what we were talking about earlier with selecting members for the SAB and getting researchers interested. But how do you know what kind of gaps that your organization has, or what kind of researchers, where you should put your energy into in terms of finding scientific advisory board members to fill those gaps? How do you go about identifying those?
So I think probably just good practice for all patient advocacy organizations out there is to perform a gap analysis when you get to that point, or if you're unsure about where to put your energy with your scientific advisory board, or if you have any other scientific questions, that would be really helpful, in my opinion. That is the first place to start. You can't really identify what the problems are without the gap analysis.
I think that also, Jenny, goes back to the question we just answered. It also, having that gap analysis allows you to set priorities. And I think in some ways that can help avoid some of the conflicts that we were talking about before between board members. Because sometimes if it's a question of priority, if that's already established and agreed upon, then there's no kind of reigning conflict around it. But I think it's really important to do a gap analysis. And I think, just to comment and kind of dig into that a little bit more, the gap analysis should be informed from your patient community, the members of that patient community, whether it's the patients, the families. I think also the clinicians should weigh in on those gaps, and also the researchers. And then I think it's always good to also step outside of that and look at some of the expertise around different therapeutic modalities and what they think those modalities could bring to that space if therapeutic development is a priority. That gap analysis should be a conversation around a community of people, and some of those may be your SAB members. Some of those may become SAB members. Some may just be independent kind of thinkers within that space. Just because you have a conversation, don't think that it means you have to tie yourself to those individuals in a more formal way.
And that gap analysis, is that something that you do once and then it's done, or is that something that you think is important to review and revisit at some kind of regularity?
Yeah, no, you should definitely review and that gap analysis yearly, bi-yearly, maybe more frequently than that. It will change as the priorities of the organization change. So it's really important to practice that gap analysis frequently as you need to.
Yeah. Very much agree.
Great. Well, do either of you have anything else you'd like to add about scientific advisory boards or why they're important or anything like that?
I just like to say one thing, which is kind of highlighting what Ashley already mentioned. I think it's important when you're engaging a scientific advisory board not to forget about the basic researchers, the translational researchers, and the clinicians in the space. So essentially, you want the scientific advisory board to be engaged with all of the key opinion leaders in that disease area. And by doing so, you'll essentially be putting together more so a collaborative research network and a group of individuals that all have seats around the table that can weigh in and engage with you on your disease space and your research program, et cetera.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think I like the term collaborative research network, Jenny. I think that's how you put it. But I think one important consideration just to keep in mind is that dynamic state that as needs evolve, your members are going to change, and they should change. But also, and we've seen this with some of our programs at Odylia, we have as an organization a scientific advisory board, but per the programs that we work on per disease, we've put together patient advisory boards, we've put together clinical advisory boards to meet the needs that we have internally for the stage of the programs, what stage they're in and where we are in development with those programs. And I think it's similar, a little bit different from patient groups. The disease is going to dictate much of that, and you're going to have maybe different things in development. But again, it's if you need to put together a clinical advisory group specifically to build the clinical trial design for a trial, that's okay. And it can be separate from the SAB. It can have co-shared members. So be inventive in how you kind of assemble these groups, because they need to be able to meet the needs of the organization at that point in time. And then I think just one other really simple question I've heard is, do I have to pay scientific advisory board members? I would say as a patient group, I haven't seen that as standard. And as a nonprofit, we generally don't do that. Industry generally does pay scientific advisory board members. That can take different structures, but I think as a patient group, that's not really necessary. A lot of these individuals are looking to help in any way they can. But again, that comes with balancing the amount of time and what you're asking of them. But a lot of people are, I think, really at their heart altruistic and want to help and are willing to donate some of their time to help further your efforts.
Great points. Well, I want to thank you again, Ashley and Jenny, for joining us and giving some insight into your experience with scientific advisory boards. Thank you for all of your input. I hope you enjoyed part 2 of our video on scientific advisory boards for patient advocacy groups. Please feel free to like and subscribe to this video so you can get access to all of our videos as soon as they become available. And please comment and ask questions. We love to hear feedback. We look forward to seeing you at our next video.